On a cold night in 1494, the richest family in Europe ran for their lives. The palace that had hosted kings and cardinals stood dark and emptied, and the mob was already at the doors, pulling down the family crest, looting the silver, burning the art. For 90 years, the Medici had ruled Florence without ever wearing a crown. They had financed popes. They had bankrolled the Renaissance itself, and now it was ash. It began with a man who understood something the kings of Europe did not. His name was Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, and in 1397, in the merchant city of Florence, he opened a bank. Not a grand one. Florence already had dozens, but Giovanni grasped a quiet truth, that whoever controls the flow of money controls everyone who needs it. And in the 15th century, the one institution that needed money most was the church. The Medici Bank became the personal banker to the Pope. Every tithe, every fee, every fortune flowing into Rome from across Christendom passed through Medici hands. They opened branches in Venice, Geneva, Bruges, and London. A web of credit across a continent, a holding company centuries ahead of its time. Money flowed in from everywhere, and with the money came power. Giovanni's son, Cosimo, understood the next step. He never took a title. He held no crown. He simply made sure that nothing happened in Florence without Medici money behind it. He paid for Brunelleschi to raise the great dome over Florence's cathedral, a dome the engineers had sworn was impossible. When his rivals had him exiled, the city's economy nearly collapsed without him. Within a year, Florence begged him to come home. They called him Pater Patriae, father of the fatherland. He was, in everything but name, a king. And then came the most famous Medici of them all, Lorenzo. History would call him Lorenzo the Magnificent, and he earned the name. Poet, athlete, diplomat, and the most dazzling patron the world had ever seen. Under Lorenzo, Florence became the beating heart of the Renaissance. He kept a young sculptor in his own household and treated him almost like a son. The boy's name was Michelangelo. He filled the city with the work of Botticelli and made his court the envy of every king in Europe. For one shining moment, a single family seemed to hold the future of Western art in its hands. But here, at the very summit, the first crack appeared. Because Lorenzo was a magnificent ruler and a careless banker. He had inherited the greatest financial machine in Europe, and he treated it like a bottomless purse for his politics and his art. He let his most skilled managers go. He ignored the branches quietly failing in London and Bruges. The foundation beneath everything was beginning to rot, and his enemies could smell it. On a Sunday in April, 1478, the Medici brothers walked into the Cathedral of Florence for High Mass. As the priest raised the host, the signal was given, and assassins drew their blades. Lorenzo's younger brother, Giuliano, was stabbed 19 times and died on the cathedral floor. Lorenzo, slashed across the neck, fought his way into the sacristy and survived. It was the Pazzi conspiracy, a plot by a rival banking family, backed in secret by the Pope himself. Lorenzo's revenge was swift and merciless. The conspirators were hanged from the windows of the city hall as a warning. But the victory came at a ruinous price. War with the Pope, war with Naples, and a treasury bleeding faster than the bank could ever refill it. Lorenzo saved his family's power, but to do it, he had begun, quietly, to drain the very thing that made them powerful. In 1492, the same year, a sailor named Columbus set out across the Atlantic. Lorenzo, the Magnificent, died. He was just 43, and he left the family, the bank, and the city to his son, Piero. History remembers him as Piero the Unfortunate. It is being kind. Piero had inherited his father's arrogance and none of his genius. When the King of France, Charles VIII, marched an army into Italy in 1494, Piero panicked. Without consulting anyone, he rode out to the French camp and simply gave the king everything he asked for: fortresses, cities, a fortune in gold. Florence was humiliated, and Florence had had enough. The city rose up. The Medici, the family that had ruled for 3 generations, that had crowned popes and built the Renaissance, were driven out of Florence like criminals. Their palace was looted. Their bank, already hollow, collapsed completely. Its branches shuttered across Europe. And into the vacuum stepped a fanatical friar named Savonarola, who preached that Florence's wealth and beauty were sins against God. In the great square, he lit the bonfire of the vanities, and the people burned their own paintings, their books, their mirrors, and fine clothes. The very art and beauty the Medici had paid to create. The empire of money had turned, at last, to ash. But the flames did not stop with the Medici. Within 4 years, the city turned on Savonarola too, and burned him in the very same square. Florence, it seemed, devoured everyone who dared to rule it. That should be the end of the story. But the Medici were not finished. In the decades that followed, they clawed their way back, placing 2 of their own on the throne of St. Peter, and sending 2 of their daughters to sit as queens of France. One of them, Pope Leo X, captured the family's spirit in a single unguarded line. God has given us the papacy, he said, so let us enjoy it. But here is the quiet truth at the heart of it all. The bank, the engine that had built everything, that turned a family of wool merchants into the masters of Europe, never truly recovered. The Medici would have power again. They would have crowns. But the fortune that started it all was gone for good. They had spent generations turning money into power, and art, and immortality. Botticelli's paintings still hang in the galleries. Michelangelo's David still stands. The dome they paid for still rises over Florence, 500 years later. The Medici bought themselves a kind of eternity. They just could not buy back the bank. And maybe that is the oldest lesson of wealth there is. The fortune that makes you immortal is almost never the one you manage to keep. If you want more empires built and burned to ash, this is the channel for them. Subscribe and watch the rise and fall of the family richer than kings that history forgot. I'll see you there.